Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, July 10th, 2023. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. President Biden is overseas for a short but busy trip. He arrived in Vilnius, Lithuania earlier today for the NATO Summit. His day started in London, where he met with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We'll hear from both of them coming up. Congress is back this week after their 4th of July recess. The Senate is considering more of President Biden's executive and judicial nominations. The House is back tomorrow with work this week on the annual defense programs and policy bill. And the Marine Corps is without a confirmed leader for the first time since before the Civil War. We'll hear from the outgoing leader, General David Berger, and Defense Secretary Lloyd coming up. We begin on Capitol Hill, where Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell both made leader time remarks on the floor today. We begin with Senator Schumer, who talked about the Senate's upcoming agenda.
A little over a month ago, both parties came together to avert a catastrophic default on the national debt, while agreeing on spending levels that will keep our country and our economy strong. This month, the work of funding the government will continue. It won't be easy, but must get done with good faith and bipartisan work. I am pleased so far that this process is moving along in the Senate, through the Appropriations Committee, through regular order, in a bipartisan way. And we will do everything we can to ensure that it remains that way. In another act of bipartisanship, on something equally significant, the Senate will move forward on the annual National Defense Authorization Act so we can keep our country safe, support our friends in Ukraine, outcompete China, and give our troops the pay raise they rightfully deserve. I thank Chairman Reid and Ranking Member Wicker for moving the NDAA through the Armed Services Committee last month, and I hope that we can move quickly on it here on the floor in July. These two areas, appropriations and the NDAA, the Defense Act, are prime examples of the kind of bipartisan work we want to see in the Senate, and which I've worked with my colleagues to foster. We also need that bipartisanship on other issues, too, to reduce the cost of insulin and prescription drugs, to hold bank executives accountable, to modernize federal aviation programs, to reauthorize the Farm Bill, to make progress on safe banking, and outcompete the Chinese government. And of course, every one of these issues requires bipartisan cooperation. Getting there won't be easy, but we're going to do everything we can to make them happen, because every one of them will benefit the American people. And of course, we'll also need bipartisanship to prepare for the radical transformations that AI will unleash in the coming years. Tomorrow, the Senate will have the first ever classified all-senators briefing from the Department of Defense and Intelligence community on AI and how it affects our national security. Our briefers will include Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and other top experts from our defense and intelligence agencies. We're still in the early stages, Madam President, of understanding AI's role in our national security. So this briefing will be critical for senators to learn more about how we're using AI to protect our country, also how it's being used by our adversaries, and what we can do to make sure that we maintain our advantages. And we have no time to waste. Our adversaries won't wait to deploy this technology against us. Congress cannot behave like ostriches when it comes to artificial intelligence. We need to learn as much as we can about AI, as quickly as we can, so we can play our part to ensure the AI revolution brings prosperity, safety, and unparalleled innovation.
Part of Senator Chuck Schumer's leader time remarks on the floor. Now, over the weekend, he announced he has asked the Food and Drug Administration to investigate the marketing tactics of the company that makes the Prime energy drink. In a release earlier today, Senator Schumer's office called the energy drink, quote, a cauldron of caffeine, and that, quote, many physicians have serious concern for it. The brand was created by YouTube stars Logan Paul and KSI. The company says its energy drink is not made for consumers younger than 18. Over on the Republican side, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell talked about recent Supreme Court decisions.
Last month, the Supreme Court wrapped up its productive term by deciding some especially consequential decisions in favor of equal protection and executive restraint. In response, Washington Democrats offered a fresh example of just how profoundly they misunderstand the court and its role in our government. The president, who has flirted with calls for court packing, warned ominously that a co-equal branch was not a normal court. The Democratic leader, who threatened justices by name from the steps of the court, branded it as MAGA. And this month, the Judiciary Committee will attempt to force the court to restructure itself in the name of ethics. But for all the Democrats' breathless fear-mongering, the record of the Supreme Court's latest term tells a very different story. By the numbers, the court remains as ideologically diverse and unpredictable as even passing students of our Constitution know it was designed to be. Nearly half of the cases the court heard this term produced a unanimous outcome. It ruled overwhelmingly in both directions, striking down union thuggery and declining to stop the Biden administration's open borders policy. By contrast, just 9% of cases were decided 6-3, with each of the Republican-appointed justices in the majority. That's 99% of the cases. The exact margin liberal commentators use to claim the Supreme Court is irredeemably polarized actually decided fewer than 1 in 10 cases this term, just 1 in 10. This is the institution our colleague from New York likes to call the MAGA court. Really? Here's the reality. In case after case, the exceptionally qualified justices Washington Democrats have spent years vilifying continue to prove their restraint and independent jurisprudence. Justice Barrett was just as likely this term to vote with Justice Kagan as with Justice Thomas. Let me say that again. Justice Barrett was just as likely this term to vote with Justice Kagan as with Justice Thomas. Justice Kavanaugh was more likely to vote with Justice Kagan. And the court's two most conservative justices, Thomas and Alito, voted together less frequently than liberal justices Sotomayor and Jackson. The Supreme Court is not in crisis when it refuses to reliably and predictably advance Democrats' priorities. The court is not in crisis when it puts the text of our law above politics. The Supreme Court is a co-equal branch of government, and it should continue to do its job.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell during his Leader Time remarks. You can always watch the Senate live on C-SPAN 2, cspan.org, and get full coverage on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Coming up tomorrow, a Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs subcommittee will hear testimony from top PGA officials on the merger between the PGA Tour and the Saudi-backed Live Tour. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns about the merger. That is scheduled to start at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. You can hear it live here on C-SPAN Radio. You can watch it on C-SPAN 3, cspan.org, and on C-SPAN Now. The House comes back in session tomorrow. Members are scheduled to debate and vote on the annual Defense Programs and Policy Bill. On Wednesday, FBI Director Christopher Wray will testify before the House Judiciary Committee as they examine what Republican leadership says is the politicization of the agency. Here's Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan.
Well, here's what I know. Time and time again, Chris Wray has told us everything's fine. He even testified in front of Congress a couple years ago, said you can sleep well at night knowing we have fixed the FISA process. Well, really, there are 204,000 reasons why that statement's not true, because that's the number of illegal inquiries they did to the 702 section of the FISA law, illegally scrutinize American citizens 204,000 times, according to the New York Times. So there's a host of problems. We know that the Justice Department has labeled parents as terrorists or simply going to a school board meeting. We know that the Richmond FBI field office said pro-life Catholics were radicals, they were extremists. And then, of course, there's been the retaliation against whistleblowers like Mr. Shapley from the IRS who came forward, and the DOJ kicked him off the case. Or other whistleblowers have come and told us about some of these issues, what they face, like Garrett O'Boyle. So we're going to get into all those issues, and I think a host of others as well. But the main point is there is no way, Stuart, there is no way Republicans in Congress are going to be for reauthorizing FISA in its current form. And that's due at the end of this calendar year. There is no way we're going to do that. We're going to oppose that and a host of other things as well.
House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan on Fox Business Network. One group of House lawmakers have already started their work. The House Administration Committee met in Atlanta today for a hearing that majority staff said would, quote, explore American confidence in elections. But Administration Ranking Member Joseph Morelli of New York said he thinks this hearing was a waste of time.
We meet for what is the 9th elections-related hearing this committee has held in just this Congress in a little over 6 months. Once again, we'll discuss conspiracy theories about hypothetical election insecurity, and the majority will push their now familiar anti-voter agenda. The only difference now is that we've taken the circus on the road. One might ask, why are we here in Georgia? The answer is simple. We're here because in 2020, Joe Biden won and Donald Trump lost. There was no widespread voter fraud in Georgia. There were no suitcases full of fake ballots. No voting machines changed any votes. In fact, we only know of one possible crime that took place because it was recorded on tape. Please play the video.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Donald Trump didn't win Georgia, of course. The results confirm that. A Trump-requested recount confirmed that. A statewide audit confirmed that. Multiple investigations have confirmed that. But instead of condemning this blatant attempt to steal an election, the Georgia legislature responded to the former president's lies by proposing and passing SB 202 in early 2021. SB 202 affected almost every method of voting in Georgia. For example, SB 202 dramatically limited the number of drop boxes voters can use, especially in significantly black communities, to return their ballots. The law banned individuals and groups from giving out water or food to voters waiting in line, sometimes for hours in the hot Georgia sun, to vote.
House Administration Committee Ranking Member Joseph Morelli of New York at a field hearing in Atlanta. You can see the entire hearing at cspan.org. And as we mentioned, defense spending bills are on the House agenda this week, but that's just one of the appropriations bills before Congress. With more, here's Stephen Newcomb, congressional reporter for The Messenger.
So it's really interesting right now, sort of what's going on in the House of Representatives. This is where this is playing out. They have to pass 12 spending bills. This was agreed on in the debt limit deal. Or face a mandatory 1% cut across the board. So they need to pass these 12 spending bills. The issue right now is that House Republicans agreed with the White House, with the debt limit deal, to spending levels. The Freedom Caucus, conservatives in the House of Representatives, want the budget numbers to be written even lower. And the House Republican leadership has so far agreed to that. So they're going to take up a couple of these spending bills. I mean, they've got to get them done, some of them done this week. They're going to mark them up, and they need to sort of go through this process. But that's what you need to see play out, is that difference between what conservatives in the House of Representatives write those bills, what the House of Representatives write those bills to, versus what Senate Democrats on committees write those bills to.
So elaborate on that a bit. If there was an agreement already set as far as spending levels, what gives them at least the gumption to lower that number?
Well, the Freedom Caucus has, the House Republicans have a small enough majority that a smaller number of conservatives can sort of we've seen this process play out. They can muck up a lot of process in the House of Representatives, and this is one concession that Speaker Kevin McCarthy has given to conservatives to be able to let the House function a little bit easier, is to allow them to have these spending bills written at fiscal 22 levels. So this is the friction between the two, but also like they have a lot of pull with the speaker, because there's such a small majority in the House of Representatives that they can derail progress in the chamber. So that's what gives them the ability to get him to agree to do that.
If there's 12 spending bills, have any of those been passed yet?
No.
And then what's the deadline for passage before concerns of shutdown become a real issue?
September 30th. So we've got until July 28th, and then we've got the August recess, and then they'll come back in September. So probably cancel your September plans, right? Everybody on the Hill will probably not have anything on their schedule other than dealing with spending bills. So September 30th is the cutoff. They need to pass all of these bills, and they need to get them through both the House and the Senate. So that's the timeline that we're looking at.
Is there some type of plan B in place should those bills not happen?
I don't. They haven't talked about a plan B yet, because McCarthy is adamant. I mean, this is one thing that McCarthy wanted to do, was pass these 12 spending bills. He wanted a more robust, I think a more transparent funding process through the House. They could always, I guess, bring an omnibus package together and push it all in at the same time. McCarthy said he's not doing that. I think that Senate Democrats would probably be willing to do that, but that is Plan B. And then Plan C, right, is that mandatory 1% cut across the board for spending, and that would take the spending levels.
Stephen Newcomb, congressional reporter for The Messenger on today's Washington Journal. You can see more from the show on the C-SPAN Now app and at cspan.org/Washington Journal. Campaign 2024 news now, and 2 races in the battleground state of Michigan. Actor Hill Harper, best known for his roles on CSI New York and The Good Doctor, has announced that he is running for the state's open U.S. Senate seat. Born in Iowa, Hill Harper owns a house and a coffee shop in Detroit. He's an alum of Brown University and Harvard Law School. Here's his announcement video posted on Twitter today.
Dear Pierce, I'm recording this video for you because I'm about to make a big announcement. And it's going to be tough for us. I'm not going to be able to tuck you in every night or do our nighttime prayers together. But these are sacrifices so many hardworking families have to make every single day. Fighting for what you believe in is hard enough, but it's worth doing when you found something that makes your heart beat faster. And for me, it's you. Yeah, I've started a nonprofit, owned a small business in Detroit, even beat cancer. Served on President Obama's cancer panel, earned Ivy League degrees, and written best-selling books. But for me, adopting you is the greatest thing I've done in my life. You see, the world you're growing up in doesn't feel like it's getting any better. It's more divisive and more dangerous. When you told me that you were afraid to go to school because of shootings, it's not freedom. Our economy works for the richest, while the most vulnerable have to work even harder than ever to keep up. That's not freedom. At the core of so much of this are too many politicians in office that don't really care about people. You see, what I learned on my grandfather's farm growing up is that when you plant something in good soil, you get something much better in return. That's why I'm raising you in Michigan. A community where people are kind, work hard, and believe the future is worth fighting for. Because every child in every neighborhood, in every town across Michigan deserves the freedom to flourish. I believe our government should work for the people, be a force for good, and protect our freedoms. And that won't happen if we keep electing the same type of people to office. That's why I'm running for the United States Senate, to represent Michigan. I love you, son, and I hope to make you proud.
Harper is the 6th Democratic candidate running to replace retiring Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. Now, your early frontrunner in that race is 3-term House incumbent Elisa Slotkin. And the man who Representative Slotkin defeated in last year's Michigan 7th District race, Republican State Senator Tom Barrett, announced he is running again for that seat. Here is his campaign announcement he posted on Twitter.
Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan was the most embarrassing surrender in American history. It lit a fire in me and Americans across our country. But we weren't the only ones paying attention. So were our adversaries, and they didn't take long to act. Now, China is creating new alliances, buying our land, building our factories, spying on us, and corrupting our children. Meanwhile, the U.S.-Mexico border is out of control. I know. I've been there. The cartels are stronger than ever. Millions are entering illegally with enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in America. Here at home, our families are less safe, with crime at historic highs, and Lansing ranks as one of America's most violent cities, all while we're still feeling the pain of inflation. We need a government focused on the issues that matter to families like yours and mine. I'm Tom Barrett. I joined the Army as a teenager, deployed around the world, served in the Iraq War, and logged more than 1,000 hours in the cockpit of some of the most advanced helicopters in the world. But I'm not done yet. Today, I'm asking for your vote and your support to represent you in Congress. I'll stand firm against giving your tax dollars to Chinese corporations, just like I did in Lansing. I'll vote to make our communities safe, secure the border, get fentanyl off our streets, grow our economy, and get the government out of the way so every American can reach their full potential. I'm not running to be the lesser of two evils. I'm running because I want to leave my children an America worth defending. Otherwise, the 4th of July will become just another day on the calendar. I'm going to Washington to restore our commitment to America and the values that took us from a fragile new republic to become the greatest nation on earth. And along the way, I promise to be a congressman you can be proud of.
Tom Barrett for Congress.
I think America is still worth fighting for. I hope you'll join me.
Tom Barrett lost to Elisa Slotkin by 5 percentage points in 2022. There are currently no Democrats running in that district. And in Oregon, Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner said today that she is running to represent that state's 5th congressional district. The announcement sets up a rematch with incumbent Lori Chavez DeRemer, whose narrow victory last year flipped the district for Republicans for the first time since 1997. On Twitter, Jamie McLeod Skinner wrote, quote, "Congress needs to focus on the basics, helping working people and small business owners make ends meet while protecting our democracy, our environment, our communities, and our fundamental rights." If elected, she would make history as Oregon's first out LGBTQ member of Congress. You can find more Campaign 2024 coverage, including campaign announcements, meet and greets, speeches, and events on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. You're listening to Washington Today.
Live Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio at 10 a.m. Eastern, PGA Tour executives testify about the group's partnership with Live Golf, a new golf tour owned by Saudi Arabia. They will be before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Live Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio. Follow on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or listen on your smart speaker. Say play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today. President Biden is in Europe to attend this week's NATO Summit in Lithuania. Today, he stopped in London for talks with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
Well, Joe, welcome. It's great to have you here. Back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as president. So we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming. Great for us to carry on our conversations, which we were having just a month or so ago, it feels like, in the White House, where we signed the Atlantic Declaration, the first of its kind economic partnership, which I know we'll be talking about today. How do we strengthen our cooperation and joint economic security to the benefit of our citizens? But also we head from here to NATO in Vilnius, where we stand as two of the firmest allies in that alliance, and I know we'll want to do everything we can to strengthen Euro-Atlantic security. But great pleasure to have you here.
It's good to be back. You know, we've only been meeting once a month. We met in San Diego, Belfast, Hiroshima, Washington, here, and couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally. And we've got a lot to talk about, and I think we're doing well. I think we're moving along in a way that's positive, but our relationship is rock solid with people in the United States, Great Britain, and I look forward to our discussions.
Yeah, me too. Great to have you here. Thanks very much.
Do you plan to go back for the AI Summit, Mr. President?
Thank you, media. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, media.
Joe, we've got.
Now, the meeting came after the U.S. announced its latest military aid package to Ukraine, which for the first time includes cluster munitions. That move has divided the U.S. with the U.K. and other allies, many of which banned the use of the bombs under an international treaty signed in 2008. President Biden also went to Windsor Castle for a visit with King Charles. The two men inspected troops there and went inside the nearly 1,000-year-old castle for talks about climate change. This was their first meeting since Charles's coronation in May. You can see more from that visit at cspan.org. And late word this afternoon on one of the main topics at this week's NATO meeting, Sweden's entry into the alliance. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan now says he will support Sweden joining NATO. That's according to a statement from NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg, who said President Erdogan would forward Sweden's bid to the Turkish parliament and, quote, ensure ratification. Earlier, President Erdogan had appeared to suggest he would only back Sweden's admission to the Union if the EU reopened membership talks with Turkey. Turkish leaders have also criticized Sweden for hosting Kurdish militants. Back here in Washington, the Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve, Michael Barr, appeared at an event hosted by the Bipartisan Policy Center. He talked about the central bank's efforts to rein in inflation.
Turning to monetary policy briefly here, and when you think about where we are in this inflation fight, how much higher are short-term rates going to have to go up for you to feel confident that you're better managing the risks there on inflation?
Well, let me start with the basic fact, which is that inflation is still far too high. And high inflation obviously hurts the ability of businesses to plan. It hurts the ability of individual households to be able to go out and get the goods they need and the services they need in a way that meets their family's budget. And so we're quite attentive to bringing inflation down to our target of 2%. We've made a lot of progress in monetary policy, the work that we need to do over the last year. I arrived at the board and we started raising rates at 75 basis point clip. We moved down to a 50 basis point clip and then to a 25 basis point clip. And then at the last meeting, we skipped a meeting. And that's all part of, as we get closer and closer to what we think is a sufficiently restrictive level, that's part of positioning ourselves so that we can try and get to that target level in a careful way. We're close, but I think you saw from our last meeting that many participants believe we need to do more. We're going to be very data dependent, meeting by meeting, looking at the data as it comes in. And so I would say we're close, but we still have a bit of work to do.
And just to be clear, would you put yourself in the many participants?
I would put myself, without regard to commenting on the SEP, I'll just say for myself, I think we're close.
Also speaking at this event was Mary Daly, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco.
Over the course of time, as the economy has started to show signs of slowing, and importantly, we have put in over 500 basis points of tightening already, well, then I see the risk is more balanced. But today, right now, with the labor market still being very strong, with GDP growth coming in, above what we think we need to do to get demand and supply back in balance, and inflation persistently high. Yes, there's coming down, but it's still not 2%. It's not our target. Then I still am waiting on doing that. The risk of doing too little are outweighing the risk of doing too much, but that gap is getting narrower and narrower. So that's why the decisions get harder. And it's why I was completely supportive and think it was appropriate to turn back the dial on the speed at which we adjust. In standing pat in the June meeting is just slowing the pace so we have more time to assess the economy and determine that. Ultimately, you don't want to make any error. You don't want to go too far, you don't want to go too little, but it's a tough problem. So more time to evaluate is really what we took in June.
But more time to evaluate, but if you had, looking at everything we know today, you still think we need at least a couple more rate hikes?
I think it's a very reasonable projection to say a couple of rate hikes will be necessary, but I'm also holding myself to what I think my team calls extreme data dependence, where, I'm going to be watching and looking, and people ask me this question, I think it's really an important one. Well, how many more public data releases will we get before the meeting? Can't you decide today? And I said, well, if data just meant public data releases, well, probably we could decide the last one that comes out, we'll make the decision. But that's actually not what we mean by data. We mean talking to firms and households and worker groups and community groups. And you can do that all the way up to the meeting. And then, of course, you have the debates and conversation at the meeting, which help us make the best decisions.
That's Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco President and CEO Mary Daly. Before her, Federal Reserve Vice Chair Michael Barr, speaking at an event at the Bipartisan Policy Center. You can see that entire event at cspan.org. The head of the U.S. Marine Corps officially retired today. General David Berger has led the Marines since 2019. He is an Afghanistan veteran, and his retirement leaves the military branch without a confirmed leader for the first time in 164 years. And we'll get to why that is in a minute, but here's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at today's ceremony in Washington.
Marines are also central to our operations and deterrence in Europe. They train alongside our NATO allies on everything from cold weather operations to mountain warfare. And as Russia continues its cruel war of choice against Ukraine, our stand-in force of Marines is critical for NATO's deterrence and defense. In fact, it's hard to find a spot on the globe where Marines aren't making it safer. And when a crisis erupts, we count on our Marines to be ready for anything and to leap into action. Today, as we work to strengthen our military for the great competitions ahead, the Marine Corps is absolutely central. The Force Design 2030 plan outlines how the Marines will modernize the Corps to deepen America's deterrence and, if necessary, to fight and win wherever they must. And General Dave Berger has led this historic and transformational effort. He's done so with vision and creativity and boldness. He's not just willing to embrace change, he's eager to lead change. It's often said that militaries are always preparing to fight the last war. But General Berger has been driving hard to deter the next war. In his 4 years as Commandant, he has focused relentlessly on the future fight. He has faced hard choices, and he's faced them head on. He's encouraged creative thinking at every level of the Corps. And he has pushed our department to redefine readiness for the 21st century. Now, despite all of his achievements, Dave is one of the most humble leaders in our inventory. In fact, he probably hates the fact that I'm talking about him right now. But I'm going to do it for a few more minutes, Dave, so just relax and deal with it. You know, anyone who's worked in government knows how tempting it can be to just kick the can down the road or to make do with the old ways for a little bit longer. But that's not Dave Berger. His staff says that he has never once hit the easy button. And that's been true throughout his career.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin speaking at the Marine Barracks here in Washington. Here's part of what General Berger had to say.
I have tried to be the servant leader that my mentors coached me to do. That was my goal. Every Marine is a rifleman, We believe that in the Marine Corps. And I tried my best to put the rifleman in the center, an 0311 infantry squad leader in the center every time. We all work for them. We know as Marines who we are. Tried my best to make sure that the Marine Corps is ready today and also ready 5, 10 years from now. And where we have succeeded, all the credit goes to all of the Marines around the world who are trying things, experimenting. They're pushing us into the future. And where we have come up short, that's on me. They get the credit, as it should be, always. This has been the honor of my life, the privilege of my life, for me and Donna to serve all Marines, all families, all sailors everywhere.
Outgoing Marine Corps Commandant General David Berger at his retirement ceremony today. Assistant Commandant General Eric Smith now takes over as the acting leader for the Marines. He'll stay in that position until the Senate confirms him. But his nomination is one of at least 200 military promotions that have been held up by Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville. Senator Tuberville is using the tactic to try and force the Pentagon to reverse a policy that gives service members time off and travel reimbursement if they seek out-of-state abortions. Senator Tuberville started using this tactic back in February, and while one member can't completely stop a nominee's confirmation in the Senate, it does force Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to move through the nomination process on the Senate floor, which means General Smith's confirmation could take months to complete because of the number of blocked nominations. General Smith does have the authority to run the Marine Corps as acting commandant, but he isn't able to hire his successor. The last time the Marine Corps had an acting commandant, 1859, when Archibald Henderson died at age 76 without a successor in place. A reminder, you can find Washington Today as a podcast at cspan.org/podcasts. You can also find it on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or get it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, subscribe to our evening newsletter. Word for word, go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington, D.C. and across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, The Hill national political reporter Al Weaver discusses campaign 2024 and the Senate seats that are most likely to flip. And then author and political scientist Lee Drutman talks about his proposals to expand the number of political parties in the U.S. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.